The diamond caught the sunlight like an accusation. I remember that morning so clearly. The air was still, the kettle whistled softly, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the house. My name is Margaret. I'm 53, a retired teacher, and for most of my life, I thought I'd raised a good man. My son Luke had always been ambitious, a little impulsive, but I believed that was the mark of youth, not greed. When he came to me asking for help to start his cafe, his words were full of promise and pride. "It's not a handout, Mom," he'd said. "It's a loan. You'll see it come back with interest." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that all the years of sacrifice had led to this moment, a chance to help my child succeed. So I went to the bank, signed the papers, and watched $30,000 leave my account. The teller smiled politely as she handed me the receipt. I tucked it into my purse beside my checkbook, feeling proud and anxious at once. That money represented decades of careful saving, each dollar a piece of my security. Still, helping him felt right. The house seemed warmer that week. I baked bread again, something I hadn't done in years. I'd catch myself humming as sunlight poured through the lace curtains, and for the first time since my husband passed, the rooms didn't feel so empty. The ticking of the old clock seemed gentler, like the sound of patience rewarding itself. I imagined Luke and Emma smiling behind the counter of their cafe, proud and independent. That picture carried me through quiet afternoons. Then came Sunday. Emma arrived unannounced, carrying a box of pastries and her usual bright smile. We sat in the kitchen, chatting about nothing in particular, when I noticed it. The ring. The diamond caught a slant of sunlight and threw it across the table, a dazzling flash that made me blink. It was enormous, flawless, the kind of ring you'd see in magazines, not on a young couple struggling to start a business. I stared at it, trying to steady my breath. "That's new," I said, as casually as I could. She laughed, waving her hand like she'd been caught showing off. "Oh, this? Just a little something Luke wanted me to have. He said every wife deserves to feel special." My stomach twisted. I smiled faintly, nodding, but inside something broke. I wanted to ask her where it came from, how they could afford it, whether the cafe had already begun to pay off, but I didn't. The questions crowded my throat and died there. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the chair she'd just occupied. The ring's glare still danced in my mind. I opened my purse, took out the bank slip, and unfolded it. The number, $30,000, looked colder now, more final. That night, the house felt heavier. The clock's ticking no longer soothed me. It counted seconds that wouldn't return. I turned on the lamp, opened my laptop, and pulled up my online banking records. My pulse quickened as the dates aligned perfectly. The transfer to Luke, followed by the withdrawal that matched it 2 days later. In the hallway, I heard his voice on the phone, laughing. "Yeah, she helped us out. Business investment, easy money." His tone was casual, careless. The words hit like a slap. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall, trying to steady the rush of anger and disbelief. I had wanted to believe he was different from the people who take advantage of others, but maybe I'd just been blind. The warmth that once filled my home now felt like a memory of foolishness. By midnight, I was still sitting there, the glow of the lamp reflecting off the bank slip beside me. It was proof, silent, undeniable, that something was wrong. I folded it neatly, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. I told myself I'd wait, that there must be an explanation, that confronting him too soon might ruin whatever chance was left to make things right. But deep down, I already knew. The cafe didn't exist yet, and that ring gleamed with the light of my sacrifice. I whispered into the quiet house, "He wouldn't do this to me." But the silence that answered was colder than truth. I realized my son's dream came at my expense. He called it a partnership. I called it a promise. That's what I told myself when days turned into weeks and nothing about Luke's cafe seemed real. I had asked him for updates, simple ones at first. "How's the contractor? Did the permits come through?" He'd chuckle over the phone. "Mom, relax, we're just waiting on suppliers." His tone was light, but his words had no weight. At first, I tried to ignore the doubt creeping in. Maybe things were slower than he'd expected. Maybe the city delayed paperwork. But when another month passed and he dodged every call, something inside me hardened. I wasn't paranoid. I was being avoided. One afternoon, I met my friend Nora at a coffee shop downtown. She'd been my neighbor for 15 years and worked as an accountant. She was calm, precise, never one to gossip. I told her everything, the cafe, the ring, the missing updates. She listened, stirring her cup slowly. Then she said, "Give me the business name. I'll look it up." I hesitated, my fingers wrapped around the mug. The warmth steadied me. "Luke and Emma Cafe Company," I said softly. She nodded and typed into her laptop. The only sound was the low hum of the espresso machine and the faint chatter of strangers. A few seconds later, she frowned. "There's nothing," she said. "No registration under that name, no business license, nothing at all." The words hit like cold water. I leaned back, trying to make sense of it. "That can't be right," I whispered. "He said the papers were done." Nora turned the screen toward me. Blank. No record, no proof. "I'm sorry," she said gently. I stared at the laptop, my throat tightening. The cafe never existed. The promise I'd believed in was a ghost. That night, I called Luke again. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I tried once more, same thing. I sent a message. "Luke, please call me. I'm worried." He didn't respond. The next morning, a text came through. "Sorry, Mom. Busy day at the site. Call you later." I reread it 3 times. "The site," he said, as if it existed. I almost laughed, but it came out as a sharp exhale. When I mentioned it to Nora, she sighed. "He's covering himself. Be careful what you send. If this goes bad, keep everything." Her tone made me uneasy. I wanted to believe she was being overly cautious. I didn't want to imagine my own son lying to me for money, but the evidence was right there, glowing on the screen, an empty registry. That night, while washing dishes, I could hear the rhythmic clink of ceramic against metal. The sound reminded me of coins falling into a jar, a small fortune draining away. Every clatter echoed a choice I couldn't take back. I stared at the window, seeing my reflection over the dark yard, and whispered, "What did you do, Luke?" A message pinged from Nora, a screenshot of the business lookup page, a single line reading, "No results found." I printed it immediately, folded the page, and slid it beneath the family photo on my shelf, the same one where Luke was 8, holding his first toy airplane, smiling at the future. The house felt smaller that night. The ticking clock seemed louder. I sat on the couch with the phone in my lap, staring at the silent screen. He could end this with one honest call, one truth, but honesty was more expensive to him than any ring. I kept thinking about what Nora said before she left the cafe. "You might not like what you find, but at least you'll stop wondering." She was right. I wasn't wondering anymore. I knew. Still, one question burned through the quiet like a slow flame, the one I couldn't stop asking myself even when I tried to sleep. If it wasn't for the cafe, where did my money go? The receipt smelled faintly of perfume and deceit. I found it tucked inside a glossy shopping bag near the couch when I stopped by unannounced. The bag still had tissue paper folded neatly on top, as if meant for display. For a moment, I almost put it back, convincing myself I had no right to look. But curiosity had a way of sounding like reason when trust was already cracked. I unfolded the thin slip and read the printed numbers. Jewelry store. Purchase date, 2 days after the transfer. Total, $29,170. My hands trembled as if I'd touched something burning. I read it again, hoping I was wrong. But there it was, the same figure that had drained from my account down to the last 100. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, startled, and there stood Emma. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed, effortless. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in," she said lightly. "Luke's out picking up supplies." I tried to sound calm. "I was just dropping off the insurance papers he asked for." Her eyes darted to the bag, then back to me. She walked over, her perfume trailing like an invisible veil, and casually slipped her hand over the ring. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said with a small laugh. "A little anniversary thing. Luke insisted." I stared at her hand. "It's stunning," I managed. My voice barely sounded like my own. For a moment, we stood there, pretending everything was normal. Then she glanced at her watch, smiled, and said she had an appointment to get to. I nodded and left before I said something that couldn't be taken back. Driving home, I kept seeing the number, $29,870, burned into my mind. The exact figure was too precise to be coincidence. It wasn't a careless mix-up or a misunderstanding. It was intention. Greed dressed up as love. When I reached home, I placed the receipt on the kitchen table and sat there staring at it. The scent of her perfume still clung to the paper, delicate but invasive. I opened a window, hoping the air might carry it away, but it lingered. Some things leave traces that ordinary air can't clear. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to steady my thoughts. If this was truly where the money went, then my son wasn't just lying to protect himself. He was lying to protect her. That realization hurt more than the loss itself. He'd chosen silence over honesty, complicity over trust. I picked up the phone and called his number. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. "Hey, it's Luke. Leave it quick." His voice was cheerful, carefree. I hung up without speaking. Later that night, I sat by the window, city lights flickering beyond the trees. The ring's glint flashed in my mind again, that same glare from the first day I saw it. My chest tightened with anger and confusion. Part of me wanted to confront him right away. The other part wanted proof so undeniable that he couldn't twist his way out of it. I thought about taking the receipt straight to him, dropping it on the table and saying, "Tell me how an anniversary gift cost the exact amount I lent you." But I knew how he'd respond. He'd laugh, tell me I misunderstood, promise to pay me back soon. He'd always been good with words, too good. So instead, I folded the receipt carefully and placed it inside an old file with my loan documents. I labeled it in my mind, not with ink, but with memory. The day the lie became visible. As the night deepened, I could still smell the faint trace of her perfume on my fingertips. It wasn't floral or sweet, more like something manufactured to impress. I thought about that, how even deception had a scent when you paid enough for it. My heart felt heavy, but the fog was clearing. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity, and clarity hurts. They spent my trust on sparkle. The first letter I wrote wasn't to my son. It was to the lawyer at the community office, a stranger who listened without judgment as I explained everything from the loan to the ring to the silence that followed. The paper in front of me was blank, except for the header, "Formal Notice of Repayment." My fingers hesitated over the pen. Writing it made it real, and I still wanted to believe he'd do the right thing without being told to. The lawyer, a calm woman with gray-streaked hair, leaned forward. "You don't have to justify protecting yourself," she said. "Just be clear. 30 days. Certified mail. Keep a copy." I nodded, even as part of me wanted to crumble. The paper felt rough beneath my fingertips, the grain catching slightly as I traced the margin. I wrote the first line. "Dear Luke, this letter serves as a formal request for repayment of the $30,000 loaned to you for business purposes." My stomach tightened around the words. They sounded like something written for strangers, not family. Still, I finished the letter, signed my name, and folded it neatly into an envelope. The air in the office felt heavy. When I sealed the flap, the faint adhesive smell made me dizzy. I realized it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth. On my way home, I stopped at the post office. The clerk stamped it with a dull thud, slid it aside, and said, "Certified, right?" I nodded. She handed me the receipt. That small square of paper felt like both a weapon and a wound. At home, the house seemed unnaturally quiet. The old clock on the mantel ticked louder than usual, marking each second as if testing my resolve. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the second copy of the letter, reading every line again. I told myself it was simple business. Loan, agreement, repayment. But blood and business don't mix cleanly. A week later, the phone rang. I answered, expecting maybe a hesitant apology. Instead, his voice came sharp and fast. "What the hell is this letter?" I swallowed hard. "You know what it is. You promised to repay me." "You're making me look bad," he snapped. "Do you know what this does to my marriage?" "This isn't about your marriage," I said quietly. "It's about the money you owe." He laughed bitterly. "You're embarrassing me. Do you want everyone to think I steal from my own mother?" "Then tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them it was a loan." There was a pause, then a low growl in his voice. "You're making a mistake, Mom. Drop this." "I can't," I said, my voice shaking. "You crossed a line." The silence that followed stretched too long. I could hear his breathing, tight and uneven, before he muttered, "You'll regret this." Then the call cut off. I stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding. For years, I'd been the one keeping the peace, smoothing things over, making excuses. Now, for the first time, I felt the weight shift. I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was standing still and letting him face what he'd done. That night, I placed the copy of the letter inside my desk drawer, beside the receipt and the printout of the jewelry purchase. My evidence was small, but solid. The stack of papers was growing, thin walls of proof between me and denial. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I listened to its steady rhythm and felt something new: control. It didn't feel good exactly, but it felt necessary. I told myself the same thing the lawyer said before I left her office. Paper protects people who tell the truth. I touched the sealed envelope copy one more time, its edge rough against my skin, and whispered, "This is where I stop pretending." He said if I pushed again, I'd regret it. The next call came with a warning, not an apology. I was standing at the kitchen counter paying bills when the phone rang. The number looked familiar, but something in me hesitated before answering. "Mom," he said. His tone was flat. "You didn't have to do that. The letter, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking about the truth," I said, "and about $30,000. A short silence followed. Then his voice shifted, lower, edged. "If you go to anyone else," he said slowly, "I'll make sure no one believes you." It wasn't a shout. It was worse, calm, rehearsed, meant to frighten. I gripped the phone tighter, my hand shaking. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than usual, each beat a pulse against my chest. "Luke," I whispered, "is that a threat?" He laughed softly. "It's advice." The line went dead. For a few moments, I just stood there, listening to the empty tone. I replayed his voice in my head until I could repeat it word for word. Then I opened the call log, pressed Save Voicemail, and sat down. My hand left a faint, damp print on the table. I didn't want to go to the police. The thought of explaining this to a stranger made me feel small. But then I thought of how many times I'd told other women to stand up for themselves, how many times I'd said, silence only helps the guilty. Hypocrisy tastes bitter. At the small police station 2 blocks away, a young officer listened as I played the recording. His face didn't change much, but his tone softened. "This sounds like coercion," he said. "It's serious. We call it domestic financial abuse, ma'am." I hated that phrase. It sounded like something from a pamphlet, not real life. Still, it fit. He filled out a short form while I sat across from his desk. "Do you have any written communication?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Letters, texts, bank statements." He nodded. "Keep them safe. Don't delete that voicemail. Date, time, duration. Write them down. Every detail matters." I scribbled in my notebook. April 16th, 3:42 p.m. Threat by phone. Save message. The words looked clinical, but behind them lived fear and betrayal. Before I left, the officer looked up from his screen. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "Just stay factual. People like this, they twist things." His calm voice steadied me more than I expected. On the walk home, the hum of traffic blended with my thoughts. I kept my phone in my pocket, as if it could still hurt me through the fabric. Back home, I replayed the voicemail again. "If you go to anyone else," his voice filled the room. I pressed pause before he finished the sentence. The sound of it was enough. Proof didn't always have to be seen, it could be heard. I opened a folder on my desk and labeled a new sheet. Police report, verbal threat. I wrote down the badge number the officer gave me and tucked it behind the letter copy. The papers formed a kind of shield, thin, fragile, but mine. The clock struck 6. The sound echoed through the house, each chime pushing back the fear inch by inch. I made tea, sat in the same chair where I'd once planned his wedding menu, and tried to breathe evenly. Every memory had a sharp edge now, the laughter, the calls, the trust. It all replayed in flashes. Part of me wanted to call him back, to scream, to ask, why? But the officer's voice echoed in my head. Keep records, stay factual. That phrase became my anchor. I wouldn't yell. I would write. I would document. I took a pen and wrote one more note beneath the date. Silence is his weapon. Truth is mine. The night settled in. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and placed my phone face down on the table. The screen glowed faintly, the last message unread. He wasn't finished silencing me. I found their numbers didn't lie. He did. I'd been staring at my own account long enough to see the patterns. Each month after the loan, a string of withdrawals appeared. $2,000, $5,500, $7,800, and $9,000. None of them matched the timeline of building a cafe. They matched impulse. Someone living well off someone else's sacrifice. I pulled out the stack of printed statements, laid them across the kitchen table, and circled every transfer. The light from the lamp pooled over the pages, turning the ink into something almost accusatory. I ran my pen under each figure until the paper thinned from the pressure. The following day, I went next door. My neighbor Ruth had worked at the local bank for 20 years. She was steady, blunt, and careful with secrets. I handed her the folder. "Could you just look?" I asked. "I'm not asking you to do anything wrong. Just tell me if I'm crazy." She adjusted her glasses and scanned the pages. After a moment, she sighed. "These withdrawals line up with high-end spending. Jewelry, travel, electronics, no business payments, no supplier accounts. So it's not just me. It's not just you." She looked at me then, her voice softer. "You trusted too easily." That line stayed with me all day. I wanted to defend myself, to say trust was supposed to mean something between family. But trust without proof was blindness. That night, I brought the statements back out. I highlighted each total and wrote beside it what I suspected. Ring, trip, renovations. The page filled with red ink like wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. The math told a truth my son refused to speak. The total came to $24,300. I stared at the sum, my throat tightening. That number wasn't just money, it was proof of a lie sustained by charm. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation. But what could he say that wasn't another twist of the knife? So instead, I documented everything. Dates, times, balances. I made copies and placed them in a new folder labeled Evidence. Around midnight, Ruth called. "I shouldn't be saying this," she began, her voice low. "But there's something else. The joint account. Your name isn't listed anywhere. It's under his and Emma's only. The money you sent went straight there." I closed my eyes. So it wasn't even a business account? No, and it was emptied fast. "Thank you," I whispered. After we hung up, I sat alone, the only sound the soft tick of the old clock. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, the neat lines of numbers stacked in false order. Each one was a decision, his decision. Every withdrawal a choice to deceive. I thought about how easy it must have been for him, transferring funds while telling me everything was under control. I could almost hear his voice, reassuring and confident. He'd always known how to sound sincere. As the lamp flickered again, I noticed how the light cast his name across the paper where I'd written it beside the total. It felt almost symbolic. Truth catching up to shadow. I added a final note at the bottom. All transactions verified by bank source. The folder now carried its own weight, heavier than paper should be. I leaned back and exhaled. "So that's how you built your dream," I murmured to the empty room. "Brick by brick, dollar by dollar, lie by lie." The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about forgiveness or family pride. This was theft, disguised as love, hidden under the name of ambition. I turned off the lamp, but the glow stayed behind my eyes. I could still see the numbers burning in sequence. Every dollar told a story he wanted buried. Emma filed first, but not for divorce. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slid through the mail slot like any other piece of paper. It looked ordinary until I saw the county seal. My fingers went cold before I even opened it. I tore the edge carefully, almost afraid of what the words might say. Inside was a petition, Emma's name printed neatly, my own beneath it. She accused me of harassment, emotional distress, and interference in their marriage. My breath caught. I read the lines twice, then a third time, each one cutting deeper than the last. They'd turned my search for truth into an act of cruelty. For a long moment, I just stood by the door, the draft from outside brushing my arm. The air felt colder, heavier, like the room itself had shrunk around me. I set the papers on the kitchen counter and stared at them as if they might explain themselves. When I finally called the legal aid office, the same woman who helped me draft the repayment notice answered. Her voice was steady but concerned. "They're preempting you," she said. "It's a common move. File first, control the narrative. Don't panic." "Control the narrative?" I repeated. "I'm not telling a story, I'm trying to tell the truth." "I know," she said softly, "but in court, those can look the same until evidence catches up." I sat down hard on the chair near the door, the one I always used for paying bills. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. "What do I do?" "You respond. Calmly, formally. You don't talk to them directly anymore. Everything goes through documentation." It was the second time a stranger had told me to protect myself with paper. I picked up the notice again. Her words, harassment, distress, felt foreign, coming from someone who'd smiled at me over Sunday lunches, who'd called me Mom when she wanted something. By afternoon, I drove to the courthouse to file my response. The clerk behind the glass window didn't look up as I slid the forms forward. She stamped them, handed me a copy, and said, "You'll receive a date for your hearing in about 10 days. 10 days. The words echoed in my head. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped back out into the sunlight. The air outside felt too warm for the weight I was carrying. Back home, I read the petition again. Every sentence was crafted to sting, phrases like persistent interference, emotional manipulation, and undue pressure. None of it true, but all of it believable enough to raise questions, and that's what frightened me most. Lies only needed to sound reasonable to become dangerous. I called Nora, my friend who'd helped me find the missing cafe records. She picked up on the second ring. "You sound shaken," she said. "I got court papers," I replied. "She's accusing me of harassment." "What? That's absurd." "It's strategic," I said quietly. "They're turning my complaint into an attack." Nora's voice hardened. "You're not alone in this. Write everything down, every call, every letter, every word." I could hear her typing in the background, probably checking the court's public filings. "They're trying to scare you," she added. "Don't let them." "I won't," I said. But the truth was, I already felt cornered. The thought of standing in a courtroom, my name tied to those accusations, made my hands tremble. That evening, I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of papers that now defined my life. Loan letters, receipts, statements, and now this petition. I ran my thumb along the edge of the new notice. It was smooth, cold, clinical, the kind of document that could erase a reputation in one paragraph. When the sun went down, I locked the door and sat in the dark for a while. I listened to the quiet hum of the house and tried to slow my breathing. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just a financial battle anymore. It was about credibility, about who the world would believe. I picked up my pen and wrote one line in my notebook. "They've taken my truth and made it a weapon." The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, a reminder that time was still moving, even if everything else felt stuck. I closed the notebook and looked at the door, the same one where the letter had arrived hours earlier. It looked different now, like an opening for something darker to walk through. Now I was the one on trial. Nora hesitated before taking the stand for me. The hearing hadn't started yet, but her unease filled the room like static. We sat side by side at a long wooden table, the air heavy with paper and tension. She kept running her fingers over the edge of the folder that held her statement, smoothing it again and again, as if she could iron out the truth itself. "You're sure you want this public?" she asked quietly. "Once I sign, it's on record. They'll know it came from me." I nodded. "I'm sure. You don't need to protect me from exposure. They already dragged my name through the dirt." Her eyes darted toward the door, where voices echoed faintly from the corridor. "It's not just about you," she whispered. "Luke has friends at the bank. They'll make this hard." "They already did," I said. "Truth can stand without makeup." For a moment she didn't speak. The clock on the wall ticked, marking each second between her doubt and my resolve. Finally, she opened the folder, revealing the affidavit we'd spent days drafting. The typewritten lines looked sterile, dates, numbers, signatures. But beneath them pulsed betrayal and guilt. She traced one line with her fingertip. "Transaction records totaling $2,400 unaccounted for," she read softly. "Funds withdrawn from a personal account, not a business one." "That's the heart of it," I said. "Everything connects to that total." Nora's hand trembled as she turned the page. The paper made a soft rasping sound, almost fragile. "If they cross-examine me, I'll have to say how I found it. You'll say you checked after I showed you the discrepancy. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less." She gave a faint nod, but her voice was barely above a whisper. "They'll come after your credibility next. The lawyer said as much." "I know," I said. "But it's not my reputation I'm fighting for anymore. It's my right to the truth." A sharp rap at the door startled us both. The attorney stepped in, a man with sleeves rolled to his elbows and calm eyes that had seen too many messy family cases. He gestured for Nora's affidavit. "We'll submit this before recess," he said. "It's solid, but be prepared. They'll frame it as resentment, not evidence." Nora frowned. "Resentment? For what?" He shrugged. "For helping her. They'll say you're emotionally involved, that you overstepped your position at the bank." Her shoulders tensed. "I didn't break any rules." He nodded. "Doesn't matter what's true, only what sticks. Just keep your answers tight. Facts, not feelings." When he left, the silence returned, thick, like waiting for a storm to hit. Nora took a sip of water from the glass on the table, her hand still trembling slightly. "They'll twist everything," she murmured. "They can try," I said, "but numbers don't bend." That line made her smile for the first time all day. "You always did have faith in paper." "It's the only thing that doesn't talk back." I looked down at the affidavit again. Her signature space was still blank. For a second, I worried she'd back out. Instead, she pulled the pen from her bag, clicked it once, and signed her name with a steady hand. The final stroke seemed to echo in the quiet. "There," she said. "It's done." I exhaled slowly. "You just gave the truth a spine." She met my eyes. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't," I said, "but they might." As she stood, gathering her coat, I noticed the faint imprint her hand left on the folder cover, a smudge of warmth on cool paper. It struck me that this, too, was what loyalty looked like. Not loud declarations, but fingerprints left behind on fragile proof. When she left, I stayed behind with the lawyer. He slid the affidavit into his briefcase and looked at me carefully. "This will help," he said, but they'll fight back hard. The next move won't be about money. It'll be about humiliation." "I'm ready for that," I said. "I've already lost what matters most." He hesitated, studying me. "You haven't lost everything yet," he said. "But after tomorrow, the courtroom lights will be on you. Stay composed. Don't let them see fear." I nodded. The words didn't comfort me, but they anchored me. I reached for the folder, pressing my palm against its surface, feeling the faint grain beneath the smooth paper. For months, I'd been chasing pieces of proof, numbers, receipts, letters, but now I realized what made them powerful wasn't the paper, it was the courage behind the ink. As I walked toward the courthouse door, the late afternoon sun caught the glass panels ahead, turning the floor into a grid of shifting reflections. For a moment, it looked like the past trying to catch me through the light. The courtroom lights were next. The room smelled of dust and judgment. The benches creaked as people shifted in their seats, waiting for the case that had turned whispers into spectacle. I stood at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped tight, trying to keep my pulse from showing. Luke sat across from me, his lawyer calm, confident, rehearsed. It was strange how family could sit just a few feet away and feel a world apart. When the clerk called our names, the sound echoed too loud, as if the air itself wanted to listen. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Let's proceed," he said. Luke's lawyer rose first, smooth voice cutting through the silence. "This is, at its core, a family misunderstanding," he began, "an unfortunate mix of financial trust and emotional tension." He turned toward me. "My client's mother has," he paused, choosing his word carefully, "misinterpreted certain transactions. There is no fraud, only misplaced grief." The words stung, not because they were clever, but because they were crafted to sound reasonable. I could almost admire the manipulation, almost. Then it was my turn. My lawyer gave a slight nod. "You may speak," he said. I rose, every movement deliberate. "Misunderstanding?" I repeated, steady now. "If trust can be drained dollar by dollar without consent, then yes, perhaps I misunderstood love itself." A few heads turned. Somewhere in the back, someone exhaled softly. Luke avoided my eyes. His lawyer interjected. "Your Honor, this isn't about emotion. It's about money." I looked directly at him. "Exactly." The judge leaned forward. "Do you have documentation to support your claim?" I reached into the folder and handed over the printed receipt, the one I'd kept from the jewelry store. The clerk took it, her perfume faint but sharp as she moved past me. She unfolded the page, the paper making a soft crackle in the still room. "Receipt dated March 12th, she read aloud. "Amount, $29,870. Purchase description, diamond ring." Her voice filled the courtroom. For a moment, no one spoke. The numbers hung in the air like a verdict. The judge's gaze shifted to Luke. "Mr. Carter, do you dispute this purchase?" Luke's lawyer cleared his throat. The ring was a personal item, not connected to any alleged loan. I cut in, my tone low but firm. 2 days after the withdrawal, the same withdrawal he called an investment. Luke's face changed, color draining, eyes narrowing. He tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her finish." I continued. That money was supposed to open a cafe, not decorate his wife's hand. The room rustled. Even the sound of someone setting down a pen seemed loud. Then came the spike. Luke leaned forward, voice breaking the quiet. "You wanted control. You couldn't stand to see me succeed without you." "Control?" I said. "You mean accountability?" "You're twisting this," he snapped. "You gave it willingly." I met his stare. "And you spent it deceitfully." The judge tapped the gavel once. "Enough." He looked at Luke, then at me. "This court will consider the documents presented. Further evidence is pending review." His tone softened slightly as he added, "Ms. Carter, please remain composed." I nodded, though my chest was tight. As the proceedings paused for recess, Luke's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something that made his jaw clench. The guard opened the door, letting in a faint current of air, carrying the mix of perfume and old wood through the room again. Nora caught my eye from the gallery and gave a tiny nod. Her presence steadied me. I sat back down, hands on the table. My lawyer whispered, "That moment, the receipt, changed the room. You could feel it." I didn't answer. I was still watching Luke. His shoulders slumped, his bravado slipping just slightly. The kind of silence that follows truth had settled over him. People began to file out for the break, murmuring quietly. I stayed seated, staring at the page that had finally spoken louder than his charm ever could. For years, his words ruled every conversation, smooth, persuasive, rehearsed. But not today, not with ink and proof between us. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing in the stale courtroom air, letting it fill me with something close to relief. It wasn't victory yet, but it was movement, the first real crack in his story. For once, he couldn't talk his way out. By morning, my story had a headline. It was printed in bold across the front page of the local paper, sitting on my porch like an uninvited guest. The Diamond Loan. The words looked almost theatrical, but the truth behind them was anything but. The sunlight caught the glossy ink, flashing across the photo they'd taken outside the courthouse. My expression was neutral, but the headline made me sound like a crusader. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at my own face. The article quoted parts of my testimony, how I discovered the missing $30,000, how the receipts lined up, how the ring gleamed too bright for coincidence. The reporter had called it a case of betrayal that blurred the line between family and finance. Thought about how strange it felt to see my life turned into someone else's story. Condensed, simplified, judged. The phone rang before I could finish reading. Nora's voice came through, cautious. "You've seen it?" "I have," I said. "They're talking about it on the radio, too. People are calling in, taking sides." I let out a quiet breath. It's strange. I wanted the truth out there, but now it's everywhere. "Be ready," she warned. "He'll hate the attention." She was right. By noon, the story had spread across social media. My neighbor, Janet, stopped me in the grocery aisle. "We're all talking about it," she said in a hushed tone. "He stole from his own mother? I'm so sorry, dear." I managed a small nod, pretending not to notice the way others glanced over their carts, pretending to read labels while listening. The quiet sympathy in their eyes stung almost as much as the judgment in others. When I got home, the answering machine blinked with one new message. I pressed play. His voice came through, tight, angry, familiar. "You think you've won because they printed your side? You'll regret this." For a moment, I just stood there, coffee cup still warm in my hand. The sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, falling across the newspaper on the counter. His threat felt empty and desperate, but part of me still trembled. He was losing control, and people like him don't lose quietly. That evening, a reporter from the local TV station knocked on my door. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "Would you be willing to comment on the community response?" "I've said everything in court," I told her. "That's the only truth that matters." She nodded, then hesitated. "There's empathy for you out there. A lot of people relate to what happened. It's struck a chord." I didn't know what to say. Empathy was nice, but it didn't restore the years of trust that had been taken from me. I closed the door gently and stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. The next day, I saw a news clip playing on a store TV. My name appeared beneath the anchor's voice. The Diamond Loan case enters final phase. Court expected to rule next week. Behind the anchor, a still image of the courtroom appeared. Luke's face was caught mid-turn, eyes defiant but pale. The reporter read from a transcript. She alleges a deliberate misuse of funds and emotional manipulation. His defense cites family tension and misunderstanding. Hearing those words spoken aloud made everything feel heavier. It wasn't just mine anymore. My private pain had become public evidence. That night, Nora came by with takeout and 2 cups of coffee. She placed one beside me. "You know," she said, "people are finally seeing what you lived through. Maybe that's the start of justice." "Or just another round of gossip," I muttered. "Gossip fades," she replied. "Records don't." Her faith steadied me. For months, the truth had lived in folders and receipts, quiet and contained. Now, it had a voice, and voices, once freed, don't go back into paper. As she left, I looked around my living room, the same space where I'd once handed over that check, smiling, believing in their dream. Now the same room held the echo of headlines and the weight of public eyes. My phone buzzed again, another message from him. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The article still lay on the table, edges curling slightly from the heat of the afternoon. I turned it over, pressing it flat with my palm. The paper felt thin, almost fragile, but the light still reflected off the ink. The final verdict date was set. The judge read slowly, each word a weight. The courtroom was so still that even the creak of a chair felt loud. I could hear the hum of the ceiling fan above, steady and cold. Luke sat 2 tables away, his shoulders drawn in, his lawyer's face a mask of practiced calm. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, on the paper in the judge's hand, the final order that would end this long, unraveling fight. "The defendant," the judge said, "is hereby ordered to repay $30,000 plus accrued interest." The words landed like stones. The gavel came down once. That single strike cut through the air like a sentence written in sound. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Luke's lawyer gathered his papers, avoiding my eyes. Luke didn't look up at all. I watched the muscle in his jaw twitch, his fingers tightening around the table's edge. It was the first time he looked smaller than the lie he'd built. My attorney leaned in quietly. "It's over," he said. I nodded, but the word didn't feel real. Over wasn't the same as healed. The judge continued speaking, something about repayment schedules, interest rates, the account where restitution would be processed, but the details drifted. I only heard fragments. 30,000, interest to apply monthly, enforcement if default occurs. Each phrase echoed, distant and flat. The words were justice, yes, but also proof that the damage had been measured and priced. That part stung most, how something as raw as betrayal could be translated into a figure on paper. When the judge finished, the clerk gathered the copies of the order. The faint rustle of the documents filled the room. She handed one to me, another to Luke's lawyer. As I took mine, the paper felt heavier than it should have been. I looked down at the printed lines. My name, his name, the total, the signature beneath. Luke's lawyer whispered something to him, too low to catch. Luke muttered back, and for a moment his hand slammed against the table edge. The sound made a few people glance over, but the bailiff's firm stare silenced him. He finally stood, his face pale, eyes sharp with resentment. For years he had lived behind a curtain of charm, always talking his way out of consequence. Now, no words could change what was written in ink. He turned toward me as he walked past, his voice barely audible. "You think this makes you right?" I didn't answer. I just folded the court order once, then again, and slipped it into my bag. Some truths don't need to be spoken anymore. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters lingered at the bottom, holding microphones, calling my name. I kept walking. I wasn't interested in interviews or headlines now. Nora caught up beside me, her shoes clicking on the pavement. "You did it," she said softly. "He has to pay every cent." "It doesn't bring back trust," I said, "but it brings balance." She nodded. "Balance is a start." The courthouse clock struck once, the chime rolling through the plaza. The sound reminded me of all the waiting, all the nights spent counting hours, not dollars. Time was the only thing I couldn't reclaim. As we reached the sidewalk, I looked back at the courthouse doors. Luke was just coming out, his head low, his lawyer trailing behind. For the first time, he looked like the one being watched. Cameras clicked, but he didn't raise his eyes. "Do you feel any better?" Nora asked quietly. "Better isn't the word," I said. "It's quieter." We stood there a moment, letting the afternoon sun fall across the pavement. The warmth felt strange after months of cold rooms and sharp words. My lawyer joined us briefly, holding a copy of the order. "We'll make sure he pays," he said. "They rarely fight enforcement when the numbers are that clear." "Numbers don't lie," I replied. He gave a small smile. "No, they don't." As he walked away, I unfolded the paper again, tracing the embossed seal near the bottom. It wasn't triumph. It was record. A written acknowledgement that what I'd endured had weight, that it existed in more than memory. Luke disappeared into the crowd beyond the courthouse gate. I didn't follow him with my eyes. The chapter had closed, but closure isn't clean. It leaves smudges, scars you can't see but feel when you touch the past. The clock struck again, marking another hour gone. I stood there, listening until the last echo faded. Justice, I realized, doesn't sound like victory. It sounds like silence after noise. But justice doesn't fix bloodlines. Winning felt quieter than I expected. The day after the verdict, the house settled into a kind of stillness I hadn't heard in years. No footsteps down the hall, no phone vibrating on the counter, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whistle of air sneaking through the cracked window frame. The court papers lay folded on the dining table, beside the newspaper. For the first time, there was no headline about me, no interviews, no flashing cameras. The story had moved on, even if I hadn't. I sat in the old chair by the window, the same one I'd used while writing that first letter months ago. The wood pressed against my back, familiar, unforgiving. The winter air drifted through the gap in the sill, brushing against my skin. It wasn't unpleasant, just sharp enough to remind me that peace can still sting. A week passed before I opened the envelope from the Women's Legal Aid Center. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for your courage in bringing visibility to elder financial abuse. Your case inspired others to come forward." I read it twice, tracing the signature with my thumb. It wasn't a medal or a trophy, but it carried more weight than either. Nora called later that afternoon. "They mentioned you in a seminar," she said, her tone half proud, half protective. "You might have started something bigger than you realize." "Maybe," I said, "but starting something doesn't mean it stops hurting." "You'll find a way," she replied gently. "You always do." After we hung up, I looked around the room. The framed photo on the mantel caught my eye, a picture from a summer barbecue long before everything cracked. Luke was grinning, his arm around Emma, sunlight hitting his face just right. Back then, I thought happiness was proof of goodness. Now, I know better. I didn't hate him. I'd tried to, but hate demands energy, and I'd already given him too much. What remained was something quieter, a fatigue that felt like acceptance, or maybe surrender. Every day I cleaned a little, sorted through old mail, folded receipts. The same ordinary acts that once felt meaningless now felt like reclaiming something. My life had been invaded through paper. Now I was reclaiming it one page at a time. The neighbors had started nodding more often when they saw me. Small gestures, hesitant, polite, almost apologetic. Some left casseroles by the door without ringing the bell. Others slipped kind notes through the mail slot. "We're thinking of you. You did the right thing." They meant well, and I appreciated it, though part of me wished they'd cared sooner. One afternoon I caught sight of the window reflection and barely recognized myself. Not older exactly, just stripped back, as if all the noise had been scraped away, leaving someone simpler but stronger. I sat down again, facing the yard where the snow had started to melt. The last traces of ice glimmered in the pale sun. It felt symbolic, though I didn't want to call it that. A small draft slipped under the window frame again, touching my wrist. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass. Freedom had come, but it came with its own chill, a silence that no verdict could warm. Nora stopped by once more with coffee. "You should come to the center next month," she suggested. "They're holding a session about financial recovery after family fraud. You could speak." "I don't know," I said. I'm not sure anyone needs to hear this again." She looked at me for a moment. "Someone always does." After she left, I reread the letter from the Legal Aid Center. The paper had softened at the edges from where I'd held it too long. I folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer beside the court order. Proof and gratitude, side by side, two pieces of paper that carried opposite kinds of weight. Evening came early. I turned on the small lamp near the chair. The window reflected the room back at me. One figure, one chair, one table. Simple. Balanced. The house was no longer haunted by his voice, but it wasn't alive yet either. It was waiting. For warmth, for laughter, for something beyond survival. I looked at the photo again. The smiles in it belonged to people who no longer existed, at least not in the same way. I didn't tear it up. Some memories, even painful ones, deserve to be left whole. The air grew colder as the night deepened. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and watched the snow outside begin again, soft and slow. I wondered what forgiveness costs. The package on my doorstep was small, heavy, final. No return address, no markings beyond my name in familiar handwriting. The edges were rough, the paper slightly creased, as if it had been carried too long before being sent. I stood there for a moment, the morning air pressing cold against my skin, before bringing it inside. I set it on the kitchen table, where so many arguments had started and ended. The tape peeled away easily, one slow pull at a time. Inside the plain brown box was a folded scrap of paper and a velvet pouch. The note was short, only 2 words. "I'm sorry." No signature. The handwriting was Luke's. I opened the pouch carefully. The ring slid into my palm. A diamond set in white gold, its gleam muted now under the kitchen light. I remembered the day I'd first seen it, the smile he'd worn, the story he'd told about buying it as a symbol of love and progress. Now, it just looked like evidence. The metal was cold against my skin. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought about every word that had been spoken in court, every accusation and defense, every quiet moment afterward when silence felt like punishment. Nora had said closure comes in pieces, not all at once. Maybe this was one of them. I placed the ring beside the old wedding band I'd stopped wearing years ago. Both were small, shining circles, proof that promises, no matter how heartfelt, could still break in perfect symmetry. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the mailbox to drop a few letters. The postman, an older man I'd known for years, nodded. "Quiet week for you," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "Only that parcel this morning. Looked important." I managed a faint smile. "It was," I said, "in its own way." Back inside, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window. The light outside was soft, fading earlier than usual. Through the glass, I watched the last of the autumn leaves drift across the yard. The world kept moving, indifferent to the weight people carried. My lawyer had called 2 days earlier, confirming the restitution payments had begun, a sum of $30,000, divided over 12 months. Justice, measured and itemized. But justice and peace, I'd learned, were not the same thing. I turned the note over again. The back was blank, just the faint impression of the pen's pressure. There was sincerity in the words, maybe even guilt, but not accountability. Regret without repair. For a moment, I almost wanted to write back, to say I understood, or that I didn't hate him anymore. But that would have made it something shared again. And I'd worked too hard to reclaim the parts of myself that didn't belong to anyone else. I put the note in the same drawer as the ring. Not forgiveness, just filing away what no longer needed attention. The phone rang once, twice. I let it go to voicemail. Nora's voice followed after the tone, gentle as always. "Checking in. Thought of you when I saw the sunset tonight. Call when you're ready." I didn't pick up, but I smiled. It was enough, knowing someone was out there, keeping a quiet watch. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I hadn't noticed it much before, but now each sound felt clear, deliberate. It reminded me that time, unlike people, keeps its promises. I looked around the house, still, clean, calm. The chaos had left, taking its noise with it. In its place was something I hadn't expected. Space. Space to breathe, to think, to remember without pain. I picked up the ring one last time before closing the drawer. The weight of it surprised me. How something so small could hold so much history, so much consequence. It didn't belong to me anymore. Not really. It was his burden returned in metal form, a full circle, both literal and moral. Outside, the sky deepened to gray. I stood by the window and watched the first drops of rain streak the glass. The sound was steady, cleansing. Somewhere out there he had written, "I'm sorry." And maybe for him, that was enough. But I knew better. Some returns can't undo what they cost. The same light that once blinded me feels different now. It falls across the table in quiet stripes, catching the edges of my coffee cup, warming the pages of the notebook I still keep near. Years ago, that same sunlight had seemed harsh, exposing everything I didn't want to see, the lies, the denial, the hollow promises that looked solid until I touched them. Now, it feels like something earned. Every Wednesday morning, I walk down to the senior center 2 blocks away. The room smells faintly of coffee and fresh paint, and the chairs are arranged in a circle. I always take the same seat near the window. People gather, some in their 60s, some closer to my age, others younger, but already tired in the same familiar way. They come to talk about trust, about money, power, and the quiet betrayals that start with a smile and end with signatures. I don't lecture, I just tell my story. I open my notebook and read the first sentence I ever wrote after it all began. Trust, once broken, becomes a teacher. At first, I can see their faces tighten, like they're bracing for something heavy. But then, something softens. It's strange how sharing pain can make the room lighter. One woman asked me last week, "Do you ever forgive?" I paused, thinking. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't a gift you hand over. It's a space you clear so you can breathe again." A man sitting near the back nodded slowly. His hands were clasped, his eyes wet. He said his daughter had taken control of his pension without asking. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was necessary. The center director, Nora, still volunteering, brings in printed guides now. She says my case helped push new awareness training for caregivers. "You started something," she tells me whenever I stay after to help stack chairs. "I didn't start it," I remind her. "I just refused to keep it secret." After each session, I walk home the long way, past the courthouse, past the post office, the same places where pieces of this story were once written, sealed, and delivered. I still glance up at the courthouse windows sometimes. The memories don't sting like before, they just sit there, like faded ink. At home, I place the notebook back on the table. The sun shifts across its cover, catching on the corner where I'd once spilled tea months ago. That mark used to bother me. Now it feels like proof of living. I open to a blank page. Writing still steadies me. I jot down small truths I've learned since everything fell apart. Silence protects the wrong people. Kindness isn't weakness. Accountability isn't cruelty. The ring remains in the drawer, untouched. I keep it not as a memory of loss, but as a boundary marker, a reminder that returning something doesn't always mean reconciling. Nora stopped by yesterday with flyers for a regional conference. "They want you to speak next month," she said, handing me one. "You'd be perfect for it." I laughed softly. "Perfect is a stretch." She smiled. "No, it's the right ending." I didn't answer right away. Endings, I've learned, are just quieter beginnings wearing new clothes. As she left, she glanced back at the table. "You ever notice," she said, "how the light hits it the same way every afternoon?" "I notice," I replied. After she left, I sat there a long time, just watching that light move slowly across the surface. It stretched, shifted, then faded, the same way all moments do, never in one sudden change, but gradually, until you realize you've survived the transition. I thought of Luke for the first time in months, not with anger, not even with sadness, just recognition. His choices had wrecked more than trust, but they had also forced me to rebuild the parts of myself I'd neglected. Some debts can't be repaid with money, but they can be balanced with growth. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. I smiled at the sound. The stillness that used to feel unbearable now felt earned. I closed the notebook and placed my hand flat against the cover. The sunlight lingered there, warm and steady. For years I chased it. Proof, justice, resolution. Now I just let it find me. And this time, I keep the light for myself. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moments stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story. With respect and gratitude.